"You'll never see that money again," he sneered. I did not flinch. I did not drop my gaze from his to check the crowd around us. I simply let the words sit in the air between us, weightless and inert, like dandelion seeds that had no soil to root in. My fingers were still wrapped around the stem of a champagne flute I had not taken a single sip from. The glass was sweating, cool against my palm, and I counted the condensation beads running down its curve as a way to anchor myself to something measurable. Something real. Leo's grin was wide and wet with champagne. He had already turned his back on me before I could offer a response, one arm draped around Penelope's bare shoulder, the other gesturing expansively toward the string quartet in the corner of our family's ballroom. The engagement party swirled around him like a current he believed he controlled. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across the parquet floor, and somewhere behind me, my father was laughing at something one of the board members had said. "I am Clara Whitfield. I am 40 years old. I have worked for Whitfield Holdings for 18 years, the last 12 of them as the senior forensic accountant. In that time, I recovered $1,200,000 in fraudulent vendor payments that had bled out through shell companies my own brother had failed to notice. I reorganized the entire trust accounting structure across 7 subsidiary entities and delivered a 99.8% clean audit rate through 7 consecutive external reviews. I quietly restructured the family's real estate limited liability corporations to avoid a $2.3 million tax lien that the board never even knew had been filed against us. And I did all of it without a single announcement, without a plaque on the wall, without my father once looking me in the eye and saying thank you. I lowered the champagne flute to a passing tray, untouched, and smoothed the front of my blouse. It was raw silk the color of charcoal, tailored, quiet, expensive in a way that required close inspection to appreciate. Across the room, Penelope wore a sequin dress that caught the light from every angle, broadcasting its cost to anyone with a pulse. Leo had rented a tuxedo with peak lapels and pearl studs he had financed on credit. My father wore a bespoke suit in navy worsted wool, cut by a Savile Row tailor he had flown in twice a year for the past decade. And none of them had ever balanced a single general ledger in their lives. I let my eyes drift to the wall clock above the bar. 8:47 in the evening. I noted the exact time because I had learned, across 18 years of watching numbers move through systems, that precision was the only language these people respected, even if they did not know how to speak it themselves. So if you are listening from your car, or your kitchen, or the quiet corner of a house that has never felt like yours, tell me what city you are hearing this from. Because I need you to understand something before I tell you the rest. Revenge is not a scream. Revenge is a spreadsheet that reconciles perfectly on the final page. Now, let me take you back to how this nightmare started. The Whitfield Family Trust was created in 1978 by my grandmother, Eleanor Whitfield, with an initial corpus of $750,000. By the time she passed away 9 years ago, it had grown to just over $4 million, largely through real estate holdings and conservative bond investments she had personally overseen. She was not a sentimental woman. She did not believe in inheritance as a gift. She believed in inheritance as a tool, and she was ruthless about ensuring that the tool ended up in the right hands. I was 12 years old the first time I realized my grandmother saw me differently than the rest of them did. She had called me into her study, a room paneled in dark walnut that smelled of beeswax and old paper, and she had handed me a stack of receipts from her household accounts. "Find the overcharge," she said. "There is one in here. I want to know how much it is, and I want to know who authorized it." It took me an hour. The overcharge was $19.47, buried in a line item for landscaping supplies, and the authorization signature belonged to my father. I brought the receipt to Eleanor, pointed to the discrepancy, and told her that the vendor had billed for 3 cubic yards of mulch that had never been delivered. She looked at me for a long time without speaking. "You will go further than any of them," she said finally, "because you actually see what is in front of you." She gave me a silver fountain pen with mother of pearl inlay that day. It had been a gift from her own father, and she told me it had never crossed the desk of anyone who had not earned. I have kept it in my private safe for 28 years. I have never used it to sign a single document. I have been waiting for the right one. My grandmother died on a Tuesday in October. The funeral was held at the Episcopal church she had attended for 53 years, and my father did not cry. Leo delivered a eulogy that was polished and hollow, filled with anecdotes about her sense of humor that I recognized as stories he had borrowed from cousins. I sat in the second row, wearing a black dress that had belonged to my mother, and I said nothing. I did not need to speak because I had already read the trust amendment she had executed 18 months before her death. It had been filed with her attorney, sealed, and it named me as the sole trustee with full discretion over all distributions. But I had not shared that information with anyone. Not my father, not Leo, not Daniel Ortiz, the family's longtime estate attorney who had watched me draft the amendment myself and had signed as a witness. Daniel had looked at me across the conference table that day with an expression I could not quite read, part concern, part curiosity, and he had asked me if I was certain I wanted to keep the document sealed. I am certain, I told him, because I knew my family. I knew that if they understood what my grandmother had done, they would either attempt to overturn it through litigation or they would simply find a way to drain the accounts before I could take control. They had never seen me as a threat because they had never seen me as capable. I was the quiet daughter who wore gray and kept her head down and solved problems that no one acknowledged. I was the invisible fixer. And invisibility, I had learned, was the most powerful form of camouflage. Leo had always been the golden child. He was 5 years younger than me, handsome in a way that required no effort, charming in a way that required no substance. He had failed out of 2 colleges, burned through 3 trust-funded startups, and accumulated a collection of debt that my father had quietly authorized the company to absorb. He had never been held accountable for a single financial misstep, because my father believed that men like Leo needed room to grow. That failure was a necessary part of building character, that the family business would eventually be his to run. I had never been given that room. I had been given a desk in the basement accounting office, a 19-inch monitor, and a stack of ledgers that had not been reconciled in 3 years. And I had turned that room into the most profitable square footage in the entire building. But they did not see it that way. They saw me as support staff. They saw me as the person who made sure the numbers worked so that Leo could stand in front of the board and take credit for a quarter's growth that I had engineered. My father called it the division of labor, and said it with the same tone he used to describe the weather. Inevitable, natural, not worth discussing. At the engagement party, I watched Leo circulate through the crowd with the ease of a man who had never been told no. Penelope clung to his arm, her engagement ring catching the light like a small, desperate signal. It was a 3-carat cushion-cut diamond set in platinum, and I knew the exact price because I had seen the charge on Leo's corporate credit card, $27,400. He had expensed it as corporate entertainment, and I had been the one to catch the entry when I ran the monthly audit. I had flagged it, written a note to my father, and received a reply that said only, "Let it go." I let it go. I let a lot of things go. But I documented every single one of them. By 9:15 that evening, I had positioned myself near the bar with a clear sightline to the study. My father had retreated there 30 minutes earlier with 2 of the board members, and I had watched Leo glance toward the closed door at least 4 times, checking. He was nervous about something. Leo was never nervous unless he was executing a plan he knew I could stop. I saw him excuse himself from Penelope's side and cross the ballroom with a casualness that was too deliberate. He disappeared into the hallway that led to the east wing, where the administrative offices were located. The trust accounting server was in a closet 3 doors down from the mailroom, and I had the only key that could unlock the software's override protocol. I did not follow him. I did not need to, because at 9:22, my phone buzzed with a security alert from the server room. An unauthorized login had been attempted on the trust management platform using an executive override code that did not match any active employee credential. The system had automatically denied access and logged the attempt, but Leo had not been trying to access the software. He had been trying to delay the alert. He had paid someone inside the bank that held the trust accounts, to process a manual transfer of $250,000 into a joint account he had opened 3 days earlier with Penelope. I did not learn this at the party. I learned it the next morning when I logged into the trust platform and saw the 0 balance in the liquid asset account. The cash was gone, transferred out at 8:52 the previous evening, exactly 6 minutes after Leo had left the ballroom. I sat at my desk in the basement office, staring at the screen, and I did not cry. I did not call my father. I did not call the police. I picked up my phone and I called Maya Chen, a forensic auditor I had worked with on 2 previous cases, a woman who specialized in trust litigation and knew the statute of that domain better than anyone I had ever met. Maya answered on the second ring. "I need a full forensic audit of the Whitfield Family Trust," I said. "Effective immediately, and I need you to execute the clawback provision as soon as the report is certified." There was a pause on her end of the line. "You have the documentation?" "I have the trust amendment. Signed, notarized, sealed, and witnessed. The clawback clause is explicit. Any misappropriation by a designated beneficiary triggers full transfer of control to the trustee, and the audit mandate gives me the authority to freeze all related accounts pending review." "Clara," Maya said slowly, "do you understand what you are about to do to your family?" I looked down at the silver fountain pen in its stand on my desk. The mother-of-pearl inlay caught the fluorescent light and scattered it into a dozen smaller points of white. "Yes," I said, "I understand exactly what I am about to do." And that was only where it began. The boardroom of Whitfield Holdings occupied the entire 32nd floor of the building my father had bought in 2003 for $11 million, cash. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city skyline at sunset, gold light bleeding across the polished mahogany table that ran the length of the room like a judicial bench. The chairs were Italian leather, oxblood, each one worth more than the monthly rent of the apartment I had lived in for 13 years. The company logo, a stylized W in a sans serif that had cost $60,000 to design, was etched into the glass wall behind the head of the table, backlit by amber LEDs that never dimmed. I arrived at 3 minutes to 5 on a Thursday in late September, 11 days after the engagement party. I wore a charcoal wool blazer over a cream silk shell, tailored pants in the same charcoal, and flat leather pumps that made no sound on the marble floor. I carried a slim leather portfolio containing 3 things: a printed copy of my grandmother's trust amendment, a USB drive with the bank's security audio from the night of the theft, and a single index card on which I had written the exact sequence of actions I would take if anyone asked me a direct question. The receptionist, a young woman named Kelsey who had been with the company for 6 months, looked up as I entered. She smiled, nervous, because she had heard rumors about me from the accounting staff. I was the one who never raised her voice, who never missed a decimal, who had once sent a vendor payment back to accounts payable 7 times because the remittance address was off by a single digit. "Miss Whitfield, the board is waiting for you in the conference room." I nodded and walked past her without slowing. The conference room was the smaller one adjacent to the main boardroom, used for pre-meeting briefings and private conversations my father did not want on the official record. I pushed open the door and found the 3 of them arranged like a portrait of entitlement. My father at the head of the table, Leo to his right, Penelope to his left. She was not a board member. She was not an employee. She was there because Leo had insisted, and my father had agreed, because my father never said no to Leo. "Clara," my father said, not looking up from his phone. "Sit." I sat at the opposite end of the table, leaving the distance between us deliberate and measurable, 8 feet of polished walnut. I placed my portfolio flat on the surface, aligned it with the edge of the table, and rested my hands on top of it, palms down. Leo was grinning. He was always grinning when he thought he had won something, and tonight he thought he had won everything. He wore a navy blazer with gold buttons, his hair styled into the kind of casual disarray that cost $200 to achieve. Penelope had on a cream silk blouse that gaped slightly at the collar, too loose, borrowed from a designer sample sale. She was holding Leo's hand on the tabletop, their fingers interlaced like a promise ring commercial. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," my father said, finally setting his phone face down. "We have an announcement to make." "I assumed as much," I said, given the formality of the invitation. My father's eye twitched. He hated when I matched his tone exactly. He was a man who needed asymmetry in conversations, a clear superior and subordinate, and I had never given him the satisfaction of performing the lower role. Leo leaned forward. "We're getting married in December," he said. "Small ceremony, immediate family only, and we're moving into the Greenwich house after the honeymoon." I did not react. The Greenwich house was a property held in the trust, valued at $1.8 million with a mortgage that the trust paid. It was not Leo's to occupy without trustee approval, and I was still the trustee, even if he did not know it. "Congratulations," I said. "I'm sure you'll be very happy there." Penelope smiled at me, and the smile did not reach her eyes. She had the kind of face that looked pleasant until you examined the tension around her mouth, the way her lips pressed together too tightly when she was not speaking. She was a woman who had learned to weaponize softness, and I had watched her do it to Leo for the 2 years they had been together. "We also wanted to discuss the trust," my father said, and his voice dropped into the register he used when he was about to deliver a decision he expected to be final. "Leo and Penelope are starting a family. They need access to capital. I've authorized a distribution of $250,000 from the liquid assets to cover the wedding and the house renovations." I let the silence stretch for 3 full seconds. The clock on the wall was analog, black hands on a white face, and I watched the second hand sweep through 1 full rotation before I responded. "On what authority?" I asked. My father's jaw tightened. "On my authority as the chairman of this company and the senior officer of the family estate. The trust is not an asset of the company," I said. "It is a separate legal entity governed by the terms of Alina Whitfield's will and the subsequent amendment she executed 18 months before her death. I am the named trustee. Any distribution requires my countersignature." Leo laughed. It was a short, ugly sound. "You're not the trustee, Clara. You're the accountant. You process the paperwork. Dad and I make the decisions." I did not respond to him. I kept my eyes on my father. "Dad," I said, "did you authorize a transfer of $250,000 from the trust's liquid account to a joint account in Leo and Penelope's names?" He did not answer immediately. He looked down at the table, then back up at me, and I saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. He had not expected me to ask directly. He had expected me to accept the announcement the way I had accepted every other decision he had made about my life, silently, with a nod, and then go fix the paperwork so it looked legitimate. "Leo needed the money," he said finally. "It's his inheritance anyway. He would have gotten it eventually." I turned to Leo. "You transferred $250,000 from the trust to a joint account at First Union Bank on the evening of September 15th. The transfer was processed without my authorization. The bank manager who approved the transaction accepted a payment of $50,000 from you in exchange for bypassing the standard notification protocols." Leo's grin faltered, not collapsed, just flickered like a bulb with a loose connection. "I don't know what you're talking about." 76 minutes before the transfer was initiated," I continued, "you left the engagement party through the East Wing exit and walked to the administrative office. You used a key you had duplicated from my desk to access the server closet. You attempted to log into the trust management platform using an executive override code that had been deactivated 6 months prior. When that failed, you called the bank manager and arranged the wire transfer manually. The entire conversation was recorded on the lobby security audio system. I reached into my portfolio and pulled out the USB drive. I set it on the table between us, aligned perfectly with the edge of the mahogany. The bank manager has already given a sworn affidavit to the independent forensic auditor I retained. He confessed to receiving the bribe and to processing the transfer without the required countersignature. Penelope's hand tightened on Leo's. My father's face had gone still, the way it did when he was trying to calculate the cost of a situation before he spoke. "Clara," my father said, and his voice was quieter now, "you are making a scene." "I am stating facts," I said. "There is a difference." Leo stood up. The chair scraped against the marble floor, a sound like a warning shot. "You'll never see that money again," he sneered. He said it loud enough that the words carried through the closed door, out into the reception area, possibly into the main boardroom where the cleaning staff had already started their evening rounds. He said it with the full force of a man who believed he had already won, who believed that the money was gone, that the evidence meant nothing, that I was still just the quiet sister in the basement office. I did not respond to the words. I did not flinch. I did not look away from him. Instead, I watched the tiny muscle in his jaw jump, the one that always pulsed when he was lying about something he thought he could bluff his way out of. I watched Penelope's fingers dig into his forearm, leaving crescents in the fabric of his blazer. I watched my father press his thumb and forefinger to the bridge of his nose, a gesture he used when he was trying to suppress a headache he refused to admit he had. They were all performing. Leo was performing confidence. Penelope was performing loyalty. My father was performing authority. And I was sitting perfectly still at the opposite end of the table, counting the seconds until their performance collapsed under the weight of the documents I had brought. "Leo," I said quietly, "sit down." He did not sit. He stared at me, and for a moment, Something flickered behind his eyes, not fear, not yet, but the beginning of uncertainty, the first crack in the armor he had worn since childhood. He had never seen me like this. He had never seen me hold a position that he could not bulldoze through. "I am the trustee," I said. "I have been the trustee since my grandmother's amendment was executed." The amendment contains a clawback clause that applies to any misappropriation of funds by a designated beneficiary, and it contains a mandatory forensic audit provision that I triggered the morning after the engagement party. I stood up. I was shorter than Leo by 4 inches, but the table between us equalized the geometry. The forensic audit has been completed. The clawback clause has been executed. The trust's liquid assets have been frozen pending a full reconciliation. And the joint account at First Union Bank has been flagged by the compliance department, which means the $250,000 cannot be accessed or transferred out. Leo's mouth opened and closed. He looked at my father, then at Penelope, then back at me. "You can't do that," he said. "You're not a lawyer, you're not." "I don't need to be a lawyer," I said. "I need to be the trustee, and the trustee's authority under the amendment is absolute. Any attempt to challenge it will require litigation, which will take years and cost more than the amount in question. And during those years, the trust will remain frozen, which means the Greenwich house will not be transferred, the wedding will not be funded, and the distributions you have been counting on will not materialize." I picked up my portfolio. I did not take the USB drive off the table. I left it there, a silver sliver of evidence that they could look at but could not destroy. "The board meeting is at 5:30, I said. "I assume you will want to discuss this further." I walked out of the room without looking back. I heard Penelope's voice rise in a question, my father's low response, Leo's footsteps starting toward the door and stopping. He did not follow me. He had never followed me anywhere. I took the elevator down to the lobby, crossed the marble floor, and stepped out into the cooling September air. The sky was the color of bruised plum, the last traces of sunset bleeding into the horizon. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, letting the breeze settle against my face, and then I walked the 3 blocks to the parking garage where my car was waiting. I did not drive home. I drove to Maya Chen's office, a converted brownstone in the financial district with a brass plaque that read Chen and Associates, Forensic Accounting and Litigation Support. The door was unlocked. Maya was waiting for me at her desk, a cup of tea cooling beside her keyboard, her reading glasses pushed up into her silver-streaked hair. "Did they take the bait?" she asked. I set my portfolio on her desk and pulled out the trust amendment, the original, signed in my grandmother's hand, the one that had been sitting in a safe deposit box for 18 months. "They think they won," I said. "Leo made a public statement. He said I would never see the money again. He said it in front of witnesses." Maya smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a woman who had spent 30 years watching people sign their own destruction and charge the legal fees to the losing party. "Then we have everything we need," she said. I handed her the trust amendment. She took it with both hands, the way you would handle a fragile artifact, and laid it flat on her desk. She read through it slowly, her lips moving slightly as she traced the key clauses with her finger. The clawback clause, the forensic audit mandate, the section that transferred full control to the trustee upon any misappropriation. "Clean," she said. "Your grandmother knew what she was doing. She knew exactly what she was doing." Maya pulled a folder from her drawer and slid it across the desk to me. Inside was a copy of the bank manager's recorded confession, transcribed and notarized, and a sealed envelope containing the forensic audit report. "The audit is certified," she said. "The report documents the misappropriation, the unauthorized transfer, and the bribery scheme. Under the terms of the amendment, the trust is now under your exclusive control. The clawback provision allows you to demand the return of the funds from any party who received them, including Leo and Penelope's joint account. If they refuse, the court will issue a garnishment order." I closed the folder. The weight of it was not physical. It was the weight of 18 years of silence, of being overlooked, of being the person who fixed the problems that no one else would acknowledge. It was the weight of my grandmother's handwriting on a document she had hidden from my father because she had seen in me what they never could. "Where is the smoking gun?" Maya asked. "The text messages are on my father's phone," I said. "I saw them the day after the party when he asked me to fix his Wi-Fi. Leo wrote, 'Paid off the manager at First Union. $250K hits my account tonight. Keep Dad off my back,'" my father replied. Make sure it's clean. I want her out of the board by year end. Maya wrote something down on a legal pad. Were there witnesses to your father's phone being in your possession? I was alone in his study for 12 minutes. The phone was unlocked on his desk. That's not admissible on its own, but it's enough to guide our discovery requests. We can subpoena the phone records, and the metadata will confirm the timing. I nodded. I had known that. I had known that the text messages were not a weapon I could use in court, not directly. But they were a weapon I could use in the boardroom, in the family, in the slow dismantling of the trust my father had built on the idea that I was not a threat. Maya stood and walked to the window. The lights of the city flickered to life below us, a grid of ambitions and failures and quiet, unnoticed calculations. You understand that this will end your relationship with your family, she said. There will be no reconciliation. Your father will not forgive you. Your brother will never speak to you again. And Penelope will ensure that every rumor she can spread about you reaches every ear in your social circle. I know. And you are prepared for that? I looked down at the silver fountain pen in my portfolio. The mother-of-pearl inlay caught the lamplight, and I remembered the day my grandmother had handed it to me, the weight of it in my 12-year-old hand, the smell of beeswax and old paper in her study. Protect what is yours with the truth, not with noise, I said. That is what she told me, and I have been silent for 28 years. It is time to use the pen. Maya turned back to me, and for a moment her expression softened into something like respect. Then let's begin. I left her office at 7 minutes past 6. The streets were crowded with people leaving work, their footsteps urgent and distracted, their faces lit by phone screens. I walked through them like a ghost, unseen, unnoticed, and I thought about the toasts they were raising at the Greenwich House, my father pouring scotch, Leo clinking glasses with Penelope, celebrating a victory that had not yet finished being defined. They thought they had won. They thought I had left the boardroom defeated, that my calm exit was surrender, that the documents I had presented were a bluff I would never follow through on. They were toasting to their own destruction, and I was not going to stop them. Maya Chen called me on a Tuesday evening, 11 days after I had left the boardroom. I was in my apartment, sitting at a small desk I had set up by the window, the city lights blurring through a fine mist of rain. The silver fountain pen lay in its stand beside my laptop, and I had been reviewing a list of bank statements from the trust's secondary accounts, looking for patterns. She said only 3 words, "Come to my office." I drove through the rain without music. The streets were slick with reflected light, and the windshield wipers moved at a steady, measured rhythm, like a heartbeat under control. I parked in the same garage, walked the same 3 blocks, and climbed the same staircase to her converted brownstone. The door was unlocked. She was not at her desk. She was standing in front of a whiteboard that covered the entire back wall of her office, covered in handwriting so dense it looked like a legal brief exploded. "You need to see this," she said. She did not turn around. I walked to the board and began reading. The first section was labeled Leo Whitfield Historical Activity. Below it, in her precise block lettering, were dates, amounts, vendor names, and account numbers stretching back 4 years. I counted 7 separate entries before I reached the bottom. "Where did you get this?" I asked. "Daniel Ortiz," she said. "He contacted me the morning after your boardroom confrontation. He said it was time." Daniel, the family's estate attorney. The man who had witnessed my grandmother's amendment and had sat silent through years of Leo's mismanagement, watching, waiting. I had always known he kept his own records, but I had never asked to see them. I had assumed he was protecting the family. I had been wrong. Maya turned and picked up a thick manila folder from her desk. She handed it to me, and I opened it to find a series of scanned documents, each one marked with a date stamp and a handwritten note in Daniel's distinctive script. The first page was a copy of a wire transfer request for $73,000 made out to a company called Harborview Holdings. The signature line had Leo's name, and underneath it, my father's initials in blue ink. Harborview Holdings was a shell company Leo created in 2019, Maya said. It had no physical address, no employees, and no business purpose other than receiving payments from Whitfield Holdings for services that were never rendered. Daniel documented 17 separate payments to Harborview over a 3-year period, totaling $392,000. I looked at the next page, a lease agreement for a commercial property in White Plains, supposedly for a distribution center. The lessor was a limited liability corporation called Northbank Properties. The signature belonged to Penelope Vance, dated 8 months before she became engaged to my brother. Penelope was the registered agent for North Bank, Maya continued. The lease was never executed. The property was never occupied. But Whitfield Holdings made 6 months of lease payments totaling $114,000 before the company's accounting department noticed the discrepancy. By then, the payments had been coded as operational expenses and buried in the general ledger. I set the folder down on her desk. My hands were steady. I had spent 18 years working with numbers, and numbers did not lie. They could be hidden, mislabeled, buried, but they could never be destroyed. And Daniel had been digging them up one by one for years. He documented everything, I said. Why? Maya looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something in her expression that I had not seen before. It was not pity, it was recognition. Because he was waiting for someone who would use it, she said, and that someone is you. I opened the folder again and turned to a document near the back. It was a letter, typed on Whitfield Holdings letterhead, dated 18 months before my grandmother's death. The subject line read, "Proposed modification of trust distribution terms." The author was my father. I read it through once, then twice. It was a request to the trust's legal counsel to reduce the trustee's authority and transfer control of the liquid assets to a committee composed of my father and Leo. My grandmother's signature was nowhere on the document. A handwritten note in the margin, in Daniel's script, read, "Denied by EW on 3/14. Trust amendment executed 3/15. She had known. My grandmother had known what they were planning, and she had moved within 24 hours to block it. She had drafted the amendment that named me as the sole trustee, the amendment with the clawback clause and the forensic audit mandate, and she had sealed it with her attorney the next day. She had not told me. She had not told anyone. She had simply set the trap and waited. I closed the folder and pressed my palm flat against the cover. "Where is Daniel now?" I asked. "He is at his office preparing the whistleblower complaint. He has been building a separate case against your father for years: loan fraud, self-dealing, concealment of assets. The trust amendment was the piece that would tie everything together. He was waiting for you to activate it." I looked at the whiteboard again. The entries were meticulous, each one cross-referenced with a date, a document number, and a source. 7 separate schemes, spanning 63 months, involving 3 different limited liability corporations, 2 abandoned leases, a fraudulent vendor contract, and a wire transfer that had been routed through an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The total amount misappropriated from Whitfield Holdings and the trust, by my brother and my father, directly or through proxies, came to $1,047,000. That was only what Daniel had documented. I knew, with the certainty of someone who had spent 18 years watching numbers move, that there was more. Maya handed me a USB drive. This contains the complete forensic audit report, including the bank manager's affidavit, the audio recording, and Daniel's documentation. I have also included a summary of the clawback provision and the legal steps required to execute it. You need to decide how you want to proceed. I took the drive and slid it into my portfolio. I want to proceed the way my grandmother intended. She nodded. Then we will file the petition with the probate court on Monday morning. The trust will be formally transferred to your exclusive control. The court will issue a garnishment order for the joint account at First Union Bank, and the family will be notified by certified mail. Not before Monday, I said. I want the notification to arrive after the board meeting. Maya raised an eyebrow. You are planning to confront them again. I am planning to let them confront themselves. I left her office at 9:17 that evening. The rain had stopped, and the streets were slick with reflections of streetlights and neon signs. I walked to my car slowly, the portfolio tucked under my arm, the weight of $1,047,000 in documented fraud pressing against my side. I did not drive home. I drove past the Greenwich house, where the lights were still on in the living room. I saw Penelope's silhouette move past the window, her phone pressed to her ear. I saw Leo's car in the driveway, a black sedan he had leased at a rate he could not afford. I saw the champagne bottles in the recycling bin by the garage, at least 4 of them, evidence of a celebration that had not yet ended. I kept driving. The call came the next afternoon. Leo, his voice bright and careless, the way it always was when he thought he had outmaneuvered someone. "Clara, hey, just wanted to let you know that the wedding date is set, December 14th. I expect you to be there." I was in my apartment, the portfolio open on my desk, the USB drive plugged into my laptop. I had been reviewing Maya's report for the fourth time, cross-referencing each entry with my own notes from the trust accounting system. December 14th, I repeated. That is 12 weeks from now. Plenty of time. Penelope's already got the caterer lined up. We're doing it at the Greenwich house. Small, intimate, just family. Just family. Yeah, and I wanted to say about the boardroom thing. I get it. You were upset. But we're past that now, right? Dad talked to the bank and they said the hold was a misunderstanding. The money is back in the account, so it's all good. I heard him take a sip of something, probably scotch. He always drank when he lied. Leo, I said, and my voice was even. The hold was not a misunderstanding. The forensic audit is complete. The clawback clause has been executed. The money has not been returned to the trust account. It has been frozen in your joint account pending a court order. He laughed. It was short, sharp, and hollow. You're not going to do anything, Clara. You never do anything. I heard Penelope's voice in the background asking him who he was talking to. He covered the phone, but not completely. It's just Clara. She's being dramatic. Just Clara, I said, repeating it to myself. I hung up without saying goodbye. I sat in the silence of my apartment for a long time, the rain starting again outside, a soft percussion against the glass. I looked at the silver fountain pen in its stand, and I remembered the weight of it in my 12-year-old hand, the smell of beeswax and old paper, my grandmother's voice steady as she said, "Protect what is yours with the truth, not with noise." I had been protecting with silence for 28 years. But silence was not the same as stillness. Silence was a method. Stillness was a choice. I opened my laptop and began composing the email. Subject: Board of Directors meeting, agenda update to Everett Whitfield, Leo Whitfield, Penelope Vance, Margaret Ellison, Thomas Croft, Sandra Upton CC. Daniel Ortiz, Maya Chen. Dear board members, I am exercising my authority as trustee of the Aliner Whitfield Family Trust to request an emergency meeting of the Board of Directors of Whitfield Holdings on Saturday, October 22nd, at 10 o'clock in the morning, in the main boardroom. The agenda will include a presentation of the full forensic audit report, a review of the trust amendment executed by Aliner Whitfield on March 15th, and a discussion of the legal and financial implications for the company. Your attendance is required. Sincerely, Clara Whitfield, Senior Forensic Accountant, Whitfield Holdings Trustee, Aliner Whitfield Family Trust. I sent the email at 10:38 in the evening. Within 12 minutes, I had received replies from Margaret Ellison and Sandra Upton confirming their attendance. Thomas Croft replied with a single question mark. My father did not reply. Leo did not reply. Penelope's email bounced back. She had blocked me. I closed my laptop and went to bed. I slept for 7 hours, straight through, without dreams. The days between the email and the meeting passed in a rhythm of controlled preparation. I arrived at my desk in the basement office at 7 each morning, hours before anyone else. I printed 3 copies of the forensic audit report, clipped them into binders, and placed them in sealed manila envelopes stamped with the trust seal. I created a digital folder on an encrypted drive containing every document Daniel had provided, every bank statement, every wire transfer request, every lease agreement, every email. I labeled each file with a date and a description, cross-referenced with the relevant clause of the trust amendment. I did not speak to my father. I did not return Leo's calls. I did not respond to Penelope's text messages, which began arriving on Thursday evening, escalating from "where do you get off?" to "you're going to ruin this family," to "I know things about you, Clara." I archived each message in a separate folder labeled Communications, Penelope Vance. On Friday evening, Daniel Ortiz called me. His voice was low, measured, the voice of a man who had spent 40 years in legal practice and had learned that volume was a sign of weakness. I have filed the whistleblower complaint, he said. The Securities and Exchange Commission will receive it on Monday morning. The complaint documents the fraudulent vendor payments, the shell company schemes, and your father's personal involvement in authorizing them. I have included the trust amendment as supporting evidence. Thank you, Daniel. Are you ready for what comes next? I looked at the 3 manila envelopes on my desk, arranged side by side, each one sealed with a dab of wax from a candle I had lit that morning. The wax was the color of dried blood. I have been ready for 18 years, I said. I hung up and sat in the quiet of my office. The fluorescent lights hummed above me. The clock on the wall showed 7:42 in the evening. The building was empty except for the night security guard on the first floor. If you are listening to this and you have ever been told that your silence means you are weak, I want you to think about what you know that they do not. That is the moment you are truly in control. And if you believe that, tap the screen or leave a comment saying, "I see through the noise." Because we are about to see how this story ends. I picked up the 3 envelopes and placed them in my portfolio. I turned off the office lights and walked to the elevator. The doors opened with a soft chime, and I stepped inside, the weight of the evidence pressing against my chest. The elevator descended. The numbers above the door counted down from 32, each one a floor of the building my father had built, the building where I had spent 18 years invisible, the building where I would finally be seen. I walked through the lobby, past the security desk, past the glass doors that opened onto the street. The air was cold and clean, the sky clear, the stars visible above the city lights. I had 3 envelopes in my portfolio. I had a court order in my pocket. I had a grandmother who had seen the truth and had given me the tool to wield it. And in 12 hours, I would walk into the boardroom and end everything they had built. I slept again that night, dreamless, my hand resting on the portfolio beside my bed. In the morning, I woke at 6, showered, dressed in a black wool suit with a white silk blouse and pinned my hair back. I took the silver fountain pen from its stand and slid it into my breast pocket. I drove to the office in silence, arrived at 9:37, and took the elevator to the 32nd floor. Kelsey was at her desk. She looked up when I entered, and I saw something new in her expression. Not nervousness. Recognition. "Miss Whitfield." "The board is assembled in the main boardroom." "Thank you, Kelsey." I walked past her to the double doors at the end of the hall. I pushed them open and stepped inside. The room was full. My father sat at the head of the table, Leo to his right, Penelope to his left. Margaret Ellison and Sandra Upton sat on the opposite side. Thomas Croft was at the far end, his arms crossed. Daniel Ortiz stood near the window, his hands clasped behind his back. Every face turned to me. I walked to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table, directly across from my father. I set my portfolio down, aligned it with the edge, and sat. "Thank you for coming," I said. "I have a presentation to make." And they thought they were ready for what I was about to show them. I opened my portfolio and removed the first of the 3 manila envelopes. The wax seal cracked cleanly under my thumb, a sound that carried in the silence of the room. I pulled out the document, set it flat on the table, and aligned it with the edge of the mahogany surface. "This is a certified copy of the trust amendment executed by Alina Whitfield on March 15th, 5 years ago," I said. It was signed, notarized, and witnessed by Daniel Ortiz, who is present in this room. The amendment names me as the sole trustee of the Alina Whitfield Family Trust, with full authority over all distributions, investments, and legal actions pertaining to the trust corpus. My father's hand moved toward the document as if he intended to pick it up and examine it. I did not stop him, but I did not take my eyes off his face either. He hesitated, his fingers hovering an inch above the paper, and then he withdrew his hand. "I am aware of the amendment," he said. "I have been aware of it since it was executed." "Then you are also aware of the clawback clause," I said. "Section 12, paragraph C, it states that any misappropriation of trust funds by a designated beneficiary triggers an immediate transfer of all trust assets to the trustee's exclusive control. The beneficiary forfeits all claims to present and future distributions." Leo laughed. It was nervous, high, the kind of laugh that was trying to fill a space that had suddenly become too quiet. "You're not actually going to do this, Clara. This is ridiculous. You're holding a grudge over a misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding," I said. "The forensic audit completed by Maya Chen documents a wire transfer of $250,000 from the trust's liquid account to a joint account at First Union Bank on September 15th. The transfer was initiated without my authorization. The bank manager who processed it accepted a bribe of $50,000 from Leo Whitfield to bypass the notification protocols. I pulled out the second envelope and cracked the seal. Inside was the transcribed audio recording, printed on letterhead from Chen and Associates, certified and notarized. I slid it across the table to my father. The bank manager's sworn affidavit is attached. He has confessed to receiving the bribe and processing the transfer. The audio recording of the conversation is on the USB drive I provided at the previous meeting. Penelope's face had gone pale. She was not looking at me. She was looking at Leo, her hand gripping his forearm, her nails pressing into the fabric of his sleeve. "Leo," she said, her voice low, "what is she talking about?" He did not answer. He was staring at the document on the table, his jaw tight, the muscle in his cheek twitching. My father picked up the affidavit. He read it slowly, his lips moving slightly, the way he did when he was buying time. When he finished, he set it down and looked at me. "What do you want, Clara?" "I want what my grandmother intended," I said. "I want the trust to be administered according to its terms. I want the misappropriated funds to be returned. And I want the record of this board to reflect that the trustee has executed the clawback clause and assumed full control of the trust assets." "You can't do that," Leo said. His voice had risen. You can't just take everything. That money is mine. It was always going to be mine." "It was never going to be yours," I said. "It was held in trust for the benefit of the family, and you stole it." I opened the third envelope. This one contained the forensic audit report in full, a document 73 pages long, bound in a clear plastic cover. I set it on the table and turned it so that each of them could see the cover page. The report documents $1,047,000 in misappropriated funds over a 4-year period. This includes the fraudulent vendor payments to Harborview Holdings, the abandoned lease at Northbank Properties, the wire transfers routed through offshore accounts, and the unauthorized distribution of trust assets. Every transaction is cross-referenced with bank statements, signed authorizations, and internal communications. I turned to my father. "The authorizations bear your initials." The room was silent. Margaret Ellison had stopped writing. Sandra Upton had her hand pressed to her mouth. Thomas Croft was staring at my father with an expression I could not read. My father did not speak. He looked at the report, then at me, then at the window, where the city skyline stretched out in a line of glass and steel. "I authorized those payments," he said finally. "They were business expenses." "They were fraudulent," I said. "The shell companies had no employees, no physical addresses, no business purpose. The lease at Northbank Properties was never executed. The offshore account was opened in the name of a holding company that did not exist before the transfer was initiated. The expenses were coded as operational costs and buried in the general ledger to avoid detection." I paused. I let the silence stretch. "I know this because I was the one who found them," I said. "I was the one who reconciled the ledgers. I was the one who flagged the discrepancies and sent them to your office, and you told me to let it go." Leo stood up. A chair scraped against the floor, loud in the quiet. "This is bullshit," he said. "You're not a lawyer, you're not a judge, you're just the accountant who sits in the basement and thinks she's better than everyone else." I did not stand. I did not raise my voice. "I am the trustee," I said, "and the trustee's authority under the amendment is absolute. The clawback clause has been executed. The trust assets have been frozen. The court will issue a garnishment order for the joint account at First Union Bank. And the Securities and Exchange Commission will receive a whistleblower complaint on Monday morning documenting the fraudulent payments authorized by this board." Penelope's chair scraped back. She stood, her face flushed, her hands trembling. "You're ruining everything," she said. "Do you understand that? You're ruining your family. You're ruining your brother's future. You're ruining our wedding." I looked at her. I looked at her engagement ring, the 3-carat cushion-cut diamond that Leo had expensed as corporate entertainment. I looked at the silk blouse she had borrowed from a designer sample sale. I looked at the desperation behind her eyes, the panic of someone who had bet everything on a man who was about to lose everything. "The wedding can still happen," I said, "but it will not be funded by the trust. It will not be held at the Greenwich House, which is a trust asset, and it will not involve any funds that belong to the beneficiaries of Alina Whitfield's estate." Penelope's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. Leo stepped forward. "You can't do this. Dad, tell her she can't do this." My father did not answer. He had not moved since he set down the affidavit. He was sitting in his chair at the head of the table, his hands flat on the mahogany surface, his head bowed slightly as if he were reading something written on the wood grain. "Dad," Leo said again, his voice cracking. "Dad, say something." "Sit down, Leo," my father said. His voice was quiet. It was the quietest I had ever heard him speak. "What?" "Sit down." Leo did not sit. He stood there, frozen, his hands at his sides, his face a mask of disbelief. Penelope was staring at my father as if he had just spoken a language she did not understand. I looked at my father. I watched the years of decisions settle on his face, the choices he had made, the compromises he had accepted, the silence he had maintained while his son drained the trust and his daughter documented every penny. "The whistleblower complaint will be filed on Monday," I said. I have included a copy of the trust amendment, the forensic audit report, and the affidavit from the bank manager. The complaint names Whitfield Holdings as the primary entity, but it also names you, Dad, as the senior officer who authorized the fraudulent payments. He did not look up. I know. The Securities and Exchange Commission will investigate. The court will freeze the company's accounts. The board will need to appoint an interim officer to manage operations while the investigation is pending. I know. I paused. I looked at the 3 envelopes on the table, the evidence of 18 years of silence, the proof of everything I had known and had not been able to prove until now. I am not doing this to destroy the company, I said. I am doing this to protect what my grandmother built. The company can survive this. The trust can survive this, but only if the people who have been exploiting it are removed. My father lifted his head. His eyes were red-rimmed, but he was not crying. He looked at me the way he had looked at me when I was 12 years old, when I had handed my grandmother the receipt with the $19.47 overcharge. You are stronger than I ever gave you credit for, he said. It was not an apology. It was not a confession. It was a statement of fact, delivered the way you would deliver news you already knew was true but had never said aloud. I know, I said. I stood up. I gathered the 3 envelopes, the affidavit, the forensic audit report, and placed them back in my portfolio. I closed the clasp and looked around the room. Margaret Ellison was writing notes. Sandra Upton was staring at the table. Thomas Croft was looking at me with something that might have been respect. Penelope had sat back down, her arms crossed, her face tight. Leo was still standing, his hands shaking, his mouth open. The meeting is adjourned, I said. I walked out of the boardroom without looking back. The elevator ride to the lobby was silent. I stood with my portfolio in both hands, the weight of the documents pressed against my chest, and I watched the numbers descend. 32, 31, 30, 29. I stepped out into the lobby. Daniel Ortiz was waiting by the security desk. He fell into step beside me as I walked toward the glass doors. That went better than I expected, he said. It went exactly as I expected. We walked out into the October sunlight. The air was cold, clean, the sky a flat blue without clouds. What happens now? Daniel asked. Now we wait, I said. The complaint will be filed on Monday. The court will issue the garnishment order. The company will be investigated, and the trust will be restructured. And your family. I looked across the street at the coffee shop where I had spent so many lunch hours alone, reviewing spreadsheets on a laptop, eating sandwiches I had packed myself. They will adapt, I said, or they will not. That is not my responsibility. I walked to my car, unlocked the door, and set the portfolio on the passenger seat. I did not look back at the building. I drove home. I made tea. I sat at my desk by the window and looked at the silver fountain pen in its stand. The call came at 4:30 that afternoon. It was Leo. I let it go to voicemail. Clara, hey, I don't really know what to say. This is crazy. You have to understand, I thought it was fine. Dad said it was fine. And the money was going to be mine anyway, so I didn't think it was a big deal. Can you call me back, please? I deleted the voicemail. The second call came 15 minutes later. Penelope, I let it go to voicemail as well. Clara, you have to stop this. This is insane. You're going to ruin everything. Leo is falling apart. He can't sleep, he can't eat. He's just sitting in the living room staring at the wall. If you care about him at all, you will call me back and fix this. I deleted that voicemail too. The third call came from my father. I answered it. Clara. Dad, I need you to understand something. I am listening. There was a long pause. I heard him breathe, slow and deliberate, the way he breathed when he was trying to find the right words. Your grandmother was right, he said. She saw something in you that I refused to see. She knew you would be the one to protect what she built. And I spent 18 years trying to make sure that you never had the chance. I know. I am not asking for forgiveness. I am not asking you to stop. I am telling you that I understand why you are doing this, and I am telling you that I am sorry. I closed my eyes. The sunlight through the window was warm on my face. Thank you, I said. That means something. I hung up. 3 months later, I sat in a new office on the 40th floor of a different tower. The building was 10 blocks from Whitfield Holdings, but the view was higher, the sky wider, the windows cleaner. My desk was minimalist, a single slab of white oak on steel legs. One white orchid sat in a ceramic pot on the corner. The silver fountain pen with mother-of-pearl inlay stood in a small stand beside my monitor. Behind my chair, hung on the wall in a simple black frame, was the original trust amendment, my grandmother's signature visible through the glass. It was the first thing I saw every morning when I arrived. I had not spoken to Leo since the board meeting. He had moved out of the Greenwich house, returned the leased car, and was living in a one-bedroom apartment in Stamford, working as a sales associate at a car dealership. Penelope had called me twice more, and then she had stopped. The wedding had been cancelled. My father had resigned from Whitfield Holdings. The Securities and Exchange Commission investigation was ongoing, but the company had been fined and restructured. The board had appointed an interim chief executive officer who had already begun the process of separating the trust from the company's operating accounts. I had used the silver fountain pen to sign the dissolution papers for Whitfield Holdings, the company my father had built and my brother had destroyed. It was the only document I had ever signed with that pen, and I had done it at my grandmother's grave, alone, on a Tuesday afternoon in November. Now I sat in my new office, the city spread out below me, and I thought about what my grandmother had taught me. The first hard truth is this: your family's love is conditional on your usefulness. I learned that when I was 12 years old, sitting in my grandmother's study, holding the receipt with the $19.47 overcharge. My father never loved me the way he loved Leo, because Leo was useful to him as a reflection of his own success. I was useful as a tool, and tools are not loved. They are maintained. They are stored. They are replaced when they break. The moment I stopped being useful to my father, the moment I became a threat instead of a tool, the love I had assumed was unconditional vanished like a shadow at noon. The second hard truth is this: when you are the fixer, they never see you as the heir. I spent 18 years repairing the damage my family had done to itself. I covered their mistakes. I hid their fraud. I made the numbers work so that they could stand in front of the board and take credit for growth they had not earned. And in all that time, not one of them ever looked at me and said, "You should run this company." Not one of them ever saw the fixer as the future. They saw the fixer as a service, a utility, a permanent feature of the landscape. The heir was always the one who broke things. The heir was always the one who needed to be fixed. The third hard truth is this: silence is not weakness, it is preparation. I stayed silent for 18 years. I documented, cross-referenced, filed, and archived while my brother spent money he had not earned and my father authorized transactions he knew were illegal. I did not speak because speaking would have alerted them. I did not act because acting would have revealed my position. Silence is not the absence of action. Silence is the accumulation of it. When you are silent, you are not hiding. You are loading. The fourth hard truth is this: the law protects those who document everything. My grandmother knew that. She built the trust amendment with the clawback clause and the forensic audit mandate because she understood that the law is not a shield for the weak, it is a weapon for the prepared. Daniel Ortiz documented 7 separate schemes over 4 years. Maya Chen certified the forensic audit within 11 days of being retained. The bank manager's recorded confession was not something I had to search for. It was something I had the infrastructure to access. The law does not protect people who are right. It protects people who have proof. The fifth hard truth is this: sometimes the only way to win is to let them fail on their own terms. I did not expose my brother and my father because I wanted to punish them. I exposed them because I stopped protecting them. I stopped covering up their mistakes. I stopped hiding their fraud. I stopped being the invisible fixer who absorbed the consequences of their choices. And when I stepped back, when I stopped holding up the ceiling, they collapsed under the weight of their own construction. They did not fail because I attacked them. They failed because I let them stand on their own. I looked at the silver pen in its stand. The mother-of-pearl inlay caught the late afternoon light and scattered it into a dozen smaller points of white. If you have ever been told that you are too quiet, that you are too passive, that you need to speak up more, that you need to fight harder, that you need to be louder, I want you to remember something. Silence is a voice. It is the voice of the person who is watching, who is counting, who is waiting for the right moment. And when that moment comes, the silence becomes the loudest thing in the room. Protect what is yours with the truth, not with noise. That is what my grandmother taught me. And I have spent my entire life learning what that means. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Share it with someone who has been told they are too quiet, too passive, too invisible. Share it with someone who is building a case, waiting for the right moment, loading the weapon of their own documentation. Because the world is full of people who have been underestimated, and the world is full of people who are about to be surprised. Keep your boundaries strong. Guard your peace, and I will see you in the next.